Reddit, regardless of your opinion of the occult or supernatural. What is the most downright creepy or inexplicable thing that you've ever experienced? This happened about 2 years ago, and every time I talk about it, I still get chilly bumps. I worked in a large hotel. 300 rooms, 2 bars, 2 restaurants and a small music venue. It's a beautiful place though, because 50-year-old things seem to constantly be in need of repair or remodel. At the time that this happened, I was under a great deal of stress. My husband had recently had to start dialysis due to end-stage renal disease. Our eldest daughter had just given birth to our grandson at 23 weeks. He weighed 1 pound 9 ounces. At his lowest point, he got down to 1 pound. And I had to work through all this. It was rough. I worked evenings, and I had come in for my shift only to realize I had not brushed my teeth. This in itself is very unusual for me, but I just grabbed a toothbrush and toothpaste and went into the bathroom that is just off the lobby. It was very slow, so I was sure I could quickly brush and get to work. The instant I entered, it was chilly and seemed darker than usual, like they had decided to go with different light bulbs. I went to the sink and felt so uneasy. I could feel someone else, but I knew I was alone. I quickly started to brush and looked in the mirror to brush my tongue, and suddenly, a cut appeared down the center of my tongue, and it was bleeding, and I kept spitting and rinsing. Then, I felt like the room was going to just close up on me. I spit in the sink one last time and ran out of the bathroom and into the back office. The receptionist stood up the minute she saw me with this look of concern. So I am thinking, I am bleeding everywhere and I feel so unbalanced. There is a mirror farther back in the office, behind the front desk, so I am rushing to get to this mirror to see what the heck is happening in my mouth. I walk to the mirror and open my mouth and nothing. No cut. No blood. But my face was white and I had to sit down. My chest hurt. I started to cry. It was so awful during an already awful time. I never went in that bathroom again, and I never understood what happened. A fleeing eye in my mom's room when I was 11 or 12. I believe it is incredibly improbable for other intelligent life forms to not exist, and I believe in the possibility of certain other supernatural examples, to an extent. I once couldn't sleep during a thunderstorm. I know I was a little old, but I went up to sleep in my mom's bed with her. Purple lightning kept lighting up the house. Around 4 a.m., my mom got up to get ready for work and left me. I continued to toss and turn for maybe another half of an hour during some more purple lightning. I remember thinking that the lightning was in a weird pattern. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something almost similar to Morse code, you know, almost something like dash dash, dot dot, etc., and I remember thinking that the pattern seemed to be repeating. At one point, I turned onto my back and opened my eyes to see one single red eye at the edge of my mom's bed. It kept moving. It seemed like the rest of whatever it was hiding behind a little stand that my mom had in front of her bed. I swore I even saw the visible eye partially ducked behind the stand a few times when it was moving. I think I remember the lightning stopped during this too. It was probably only a few minutes of the eye and I staring at each other, but I was absolutely paralyzed in fear. I DK exactly what happened for it to leave. I probably hid under the blanket, and when I came up, it was gone. The lightning resumed. My mom never believed me. As kids, I think my sisters and I were super in touch with the supernatural world. The three of us legitimately had way too many experiences together. And honestly, we talked about them years later, and every one of us still remembers. They all seemed to occur in the same house. So that might have had something to do with it. The first one, I remember, was a collective friend we had that would come and visit at night. The Green Man. He was this short glowing green guy with a large head and a top hat that would come in through the window and sit on the dresser. He brought with him this sense of deep calm and peace. I'd wake up to my sister talking to him, or I'd be talking to him and the sisters would wake up. We slept on bunk bed. 2 on the bottom and me on the top. He visited a lot. At the same house. We were walking home from school. We live in the desert, so across the way, there are a lot of small canyons and fissures. We spotted a woman in black standing at the edge of one of the fissures. She turned to stare at us, and it was only then that we realized she was floating over the gorge. She screamed. High-pitched and shrieking, and started rushing towards us so fast. Somehow, she split in half. Part of her dropped into the gorge, and the other part raced towards us. We were with friends and all of us, even the older boys, ran away screaming. We got home and hid under the bed until our parents came home. To this day, I think she was La Llorona. I was friends with a bunch of filmmakers. My sister, we are twins so we went to college together, was one of them. And in this case, we were filming her original story, a post-apocalyptic robot sort of film. Anyway, the college was destroying a whole bunch of the old dorms. They had asbestos and were seemed unsafe. We got permission from the school to film in the building. It was closed since the 80s, so there were some really neat artifacts, and it was unbelievably creepy. No lights, just what we could run on the generator. Myself and another film guy, Jess, were getting one of the dorm rooms ready for filming. It had been a couple hours, and we expected the actors and my sister to come by soon. Me and the guy were working when I heard someone call my name. Gecko. I yelled. We're on the 3rd floor. Jess? Someone yells, then Jess yells back, come meet us on the 3rd floor. This goes on for maybe another 30 seconds. The voices sound distant. Jess gets annoyed and calls my sis, tells her we're on the 3rd floor. My sister says they're running late. One of the actors hasn't showed up. Jess gives me this look and we both just get super nervous. Who's here then? Nobody, no one was there. Everyone was across town, getting dressed up for the film at the house. The buildings were completely abandoned. And no one had the keys but us. Years ago my friend Colleen and I got lost getting to another friend's house. We were about 40 minutes from home in a town where neither of us knew a soul. This is years before cell phones, we were using a printed out MapQuest map. So we stopped and asked these two guys for directions. We're in a small developing neighborhood where the guys are working in an empty lot with a tree in it, and at the base of the tree is this little girl playing. So, I'm watching this little girl, I'm totally mesmerized by her. I'm hoping Colleen is listening to the directions these guys are giving us because I sure wasn't. I can see her so clearly in my mind. She is about 8 years old in a white party dress with a red ribbon around her waist and a matching one in her long wavy red blonde hair. This little girl was so out of place. Nothing felt right. She wasn't with these men, she was all alone in this dirt lot. It just didn't make sense. Then she looked at Colleen and I, right at us, and said in the creepiest voice imaginable. Hi Colleen. Colleen had no idea who that little girl was, and to this day, we're both weirded out when we talk about it. I work in a hospital. I had a very distinct-looking patient pass away. The next day, there was a new patient in the room who was very elderly, demented, and close to dying. She stated all the normal close-to-death talk, but then calmly looked to the corner and started asking the empty corner, "Who are you? Why are you here?" I asked her who she was talking to, and she said, "There's a woman with bright red, curly hair telling me I'm in her room." The patient who passed the night before matched her description. I backed myself right out of that room. I used to live in a house my family rented from a family we went to church with. The father of said family was killed when his youngest was 2 weeks old, and he had 4 other kids under 5. The family moved to another state to be with family after this happened, and although he didn't die in the house, I believe the emotions afterward fed some type of dark energy. When I was going to bed at night, I would always basically feel fingers poking my back through my mattress, all over my entire back. I forced myself to believe it was just my mind, but since moving from that house, I have the same bed, and it's never happened to me since. Also one morning, I woke up around 5 a.m. The sun had just risen, but my entire family was still asleep. I had my bedroom door open and all of a sudden, a tall dark shadow figure walked into my room and was coming towards me. I jumped up and sprinted into my sister's room across the hall and laid down in her bed, forcing myself to believe I had projected a dream or something. But I could see in my room from my sister's, and I watched the figure come out of my room and come into my sister's and come around to the side of the bed I was on. I jumped up again and ran out of the room, but kept telling myself I had to just be tripping out, plus, I knew my parents would never believe what I had just seen. I went to the office and got on the computer and turned on a game to distract myself. As the computer was turning on, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I looked up at the crack in the doorway in front of me and saw darkness up to the height of the figure and then clearly above it. It, clear as day, was standing on the other side of the door watching me through the crack. At that point, I burst into tears and woke my mom up. This happened 8 years ago, and I still get goosebumps when I think about it. Edit. I actually have a lot more stories from this house, and after moving out, I found out both of my parents, who are firm anti-ghost believers, had had experiences they couldn't explain that scared them. My mom believes in angels and demons and firmly believes there was a demon in that house. My sister and I would both see a figure that looked exactly like our dad standing in the kitchen in the middle of the night when we woke up to use the restroom or get water. It always stood with its back to us, and when we called out, "Dad," it wouldn't respond, and we would get a bad evil feeling, sprint to our parents' room where our dad was always in sleeping, and wake them up crying. We also had French doors in the master bedroom that were parallel to the back doors in the living room. When my sister and I were home alone, we would sometimes see a figure pacing back and forth in my parents' room, and each time it passed the blinds would rustle. Anytime I was ever in my room, I would always feel unnerved, like something was watching me, and I never spent time in my parents' room or sister's room because they both gave me a terrifying feeling. I developed insomnia and would lay in bed tossing and turning every night until 3 a.m., having stomach-turning anxiety the entire time. Keep in mind, nothing negative was going on in my personal life to be affecting me. It was uncomfortable anytime I was home because every part of the house I felt like I was being watched. After moving out, I have never had anxiety, insomnia, or any feeling of being watched. I also once blacked out and came to after walking all the way to my parents' room and sticking tweezers in the outlet in their bathroom, which caused the breaker to short, but technically should have killed me. I grew up in an old Victorian home. Imagine grand woodworking everywhere, large chandeliers, a dirt floor basement, a clawfoot tub, and a winding staircase to the attic. The wood floors creaked. The house seemed to shift and settle with the wind. Doors would suddenly slam shut. I had a lot of weird occurrences growing up. Here are a few. The upstairs bathroom, in particular, had a very heavy energy. I woke up in the middle of the night to use the restroom. I looked up and saw a boy standing in the corner, then he was gone. The next day, I told my mom how weird but vivid it was. I had no memory of this, but she proceeded to tell me when she used to bathe me, I would tell her there was a boy standing in the corner of the bathroom. I used to play and talk with him. I called him Joey. My room shared a vent with the bathroom. One afternoon, I heard my name repeatedly whispered through it. I assumed my brother got home and was messing with me. I walked to the bathroom to tell him to stop. Then I searched the house. Sure enough, I was home alone. I was awakened in the middle of the night by a very real feeling of hands wrapping tightly around my thigh and pulling. I could feel the leftover impressions of fingers. I was getting ready in my room when I heard what sounded like a boy's scream of absolute terror. My dad's TV was blaring downstairs. Right after it happened, I heard him shut it off. I yelled down the banister to ask if it was his TV. He was at the bottom of the stairs and exclaimed he thought it came from upstairs. I told a few creepy stories about my house at team bonding for volleyball in high school. The next day, my teammates were telling our coach about the stories. Turns out, coach grew up in the same house. She shook her head in agreement. Looked at me so serious and said, "Oh, I know. That house is definitely haunted." That confirmed it for me. Definitely some weird things going on in that house.